So welcome back to another video. In this video, I'm going to talk about something totally different, and that is why Jehovah's Witnesses' claim of their peak publisher number is a total fabrication and a lie. Now, I'm going to go over the history of Jehovah's Witnesses and counting them, and also show facts why they make these numbers up, and we cannot believe them when they tell how many people actually are witnesses. So for the time of the early, even in the 1920s and 30s, they would always brag and boast how fast their organization was growing, how fast the religion was increasing in numbers. Before I was born, most kingdom halls would actually have an easel when you walked in to show how many publishers were in the congregation, how many hours, Bible studies, return visits, or back calls they had each month. It was foremost and front and center. They always bragged about how many was at the conventions, how many were at the assemblies, how many were getting baptized each and every year. And in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, and 90s, this was the case. They were growing very, very fast. But in recent years, they've slowly tried to back away from putting that number foremost every day in front of the average publisher's lives. It's harder to find that number. And they also don't claim it as much as they used to be when they are talking about how fast they are growing. So let's go back. In 1975, we know for the last 9 years before that, there was major growth, 10, 12% a year. But then the 75 prophecy failed to come true. Now, as a child, I did research on the growth in the United States, and I showed my dad that from 1976 to 1980, there was actually no growth. It was a decline in the United States. It wasn't until 1981 that the numbers of Jehovah's Witnesses in the U.S. territory actually passed 75. It took them almost 6 years. Now, the rest of the world wasn't as bad, but America, it was bad because so many people stopped going after they realized that 75 was a hoax. But he, again, ignored it. He's like, it's no big deal. I'm like, all right, I was just a kid. What did I know? But back then when I was a kid, it was everywhere. So every month in the Kingdom Ministry, there would be a little box how many publishers were in our country. Now, again, living in Pennsylvania in the United States, I was part of those 48 states. Now, back then, there was a branch in Hawaii, there was a branch in Alaska, and there was also a branch in Puerto Rico. So those witnesses were not counted in that Kingdom Ministry article, that little box each month. Yes, if you look at the old yearbooks, Alaska, Hawaii, and Puerto Rico are broken down into separate countries or separate lands. So that was just detailing the 48 states. Now later on, when they try to save money, they closed the Alaska branch down, they closed the Puerto Rico branch, they closed the Hawaii branch. Now Alaska only had about 2,000 or 3,000 witnesses, but there was over 20,000 in both Puerto Rico and in Hawaii. Plus later on, several smaller Caribbean islands branches were closed, and they are compiled in the United States figure. So the United States did grow, but it didn't grow as fast as they claim it did because they were actually adding a lot more lands than they previously talked about. So the Kingdom Ministry was the first place. Then in the fall of every year, we got the yearbook, and there was always a 4 and 8 page breakdown of every single country, land, territory. But that wasn't it. The January 15th Watchtower also had the report of how many people were the witnesses. Now this is way more in depth sometimes, and they would always be an article around it about how the growth. And I can remember so many times the Watchtower conductor saying, what did you like about the report? What fact did you find was amazing? So slowly the witnesses stopped backing away from this number when the growth slowed down. So what was the first thing to go? Well, I'm pretty sure the first thing to go was the Kingdom Ministry. So we stopped printing the annual report, the monthly report every month. Then the next thing was the January 15th Watchtower. That no longer had it. But we still had the nice in-depth report in the yearbook. Well, finally, 2 years ago, they stopped printing our yearbooks. So for the past 2 years, the only way really we mention it is in this report they just released a few months ago. But it's not the report that it was. It just highlights a few things. It doesn't really show how much each country has grown. Yes, they're really pulling back because they're really ashamed how much the area really is not growing anymore. So why do I say that Jehovah's Witnesses' peak publisher number is a lie? Well, first let's examine how Jehovah's Witnesses count their numbers. and how we know that even though they do not believe in this peak publisher number. So every congregation can number anywhere from 20 to 200. And there is a number of publishers in that congregation. There is active, and there's irregular and inactive. And in all the congregations that I served as an elder and ministerial servant, we handle it the same way. In that metal box, all the inactive will be in the back, but they'd still be counted part of that congregation. The irregulars, people who missed 1 month out of the last 6, were still with the regular publishers. Let's do it in simple math. Let's say we had a congregation of 100 publishers. 100 publishers. Well, every month somebody would forget to turn their time in. So they could be irregular. Sometimes there might be 2 months. Now, a month later, they might have time for that month they missed, and they would be counted on the next report. So usually in my congregation, we had about 91 to 93 people reporting every month. But we had about 125 to 130 actual cards. Some hadn't been out in service in years, even a decade, but they were still in that box. So what would happen every year? Well, around August, it was the end of the service year, and there was always a push to get everybody's time in for August. So we would have shepherding calls with sisters or brothers who hadn't been to the meetings in a few months, who hadn't been out in service, and go encourage them to report time for the month of August. So we would drive to their house, call them up, and say, "Sister, did you have any time from August?" And they would say, usually no. And I would ask them, and other elders would say, "Not even 5-15 minutes?" And sometimes they would say, "Well, I talked to my hairdresser. I gave her a magazine." Guess what? You have service time. What about July or June? Did you talk to that same hairdresser? Well, yes, I did. Well, guess what, sister? You have service time for June, July, and August. You are no longer inactive or regular. Isn't that great? So what would happen? Now, this woman hadn't actually been door to door for months, but she would get recorded not 1 time for August, but 3 times for August. So in August, in both of my congregations, I served as an elder. Sometimes we would have 10 to 15% higher for a peak publisher than our average publisher count. Another reason why the Watchtower never bought into peak publishers, our circuit overseers never ever cared about how many was our peak publisher. They always strengthened and enforced that average publisher number. So the peak publisher number can be easily bloated. It doesn't have to be August. It could be any month. It could be March during the memorial campaign when they're trying to get as many people to report service time as possible. But it just shows you that the Jehovah's Witnesses can manipulate the numbers however they want to. So for instance, in August of 2015, my last time I was a service overseer, again, the most we'd have about 97 publishers, but usually it was about 91. We reported 115 for August. Because again, it wasn't just one person, it was multiple people recording several months at once. We go back and fill in their publisher cards again for that month. Circuit overseer come through, they're not a regular, they're not inactive. And the reason why this was so important, because if you're regular and active, you couldn't auxiliary pioneer or have other privileges. So you needed those little boxes filled in on your publisher card in the file. But this does not just mean individual congregations. This is also multiple congregations itself would fail to report. Now, I know it's different now with electronic means, but 20 years ago, I was visiting my parents, and my parents had hundreds of Bethelites visit their home over the years. We had many, many people would get out of the city and come to stay at my house. All the time I was growing up until even after I moved out of the house. So about 97, 98, I was just newly married, and we had a brother from the service department there. I was a new ministerial servant, and I was really excited, so I'm asking him questions about the reports and how they compile it and how much work it is. And he's telling me a lot of things. But then he says, there are some things I can't tell you. I'm like, I understand. I'm just a servant. Who am I? But he did say something really fascinating. He said that report in the Kingdom Ministry is never accurate. And I'm like, what do you mean? He said every month, about 300 congregations in the United States don't get their time in on time. And I'm like, really? He goes, yes. If they don't get it in, we can't put it in that monthly report in the Kingdom Ministry. But I said, well, what happens? He goes, well, we add that congregation to the next report when they get it in. It is counted, but it's counted a month later. So I was like shocked at this. Here, I'm a 22, 21-year-old ministerial servant, and I'm shocked that an entire congregation get their time reported, because we were told that if we didn't go out in service that month, we could be blood guilty. Well, if we went out but it wasn't reported, isn't that the same thing? So imagine 300 congregations. That's like 3,000 witnesses not reporting for 1 month and then reporting for the next month. And also adding that to each congregation had a high peak publisher. You could easily have a much higher publisher count than you really actually have. Now, again, has this changed since the internet? Probably it has. Probably congregations are a lot better at getting their time in because they don't mail it in anymore. They just go online. But again, it shows you that anybody can play with these numbers. That I really, really think that the number of Jehovah's Witnesses is far less than they're reporting. I think they're trying to prop up this peak publisher number just to show there's any gains or growth. And when you compare peak to average and show there's a growth, that is a blatant lie. That is dishonest, deceitful, and immoral. They should be ashamed of themselves. So yes, this is just a little quick video why I really think that the numbers really are dwindling worse than they actually are letting on. Now, there is nothing to prevent Watchtower from just making up numbers. There's no way to actually double check them or fact check them. But until we actually can find proof of it, we can really see that this peak publisher number is a total sham. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.